Well, new developments now in another controversy for the Obama administration. This one involves the IRS is targeting conservatives and other groups for, well, about 2 years. Congressional sources now confirmed to Fox News that this Washington-based IRS supervisor based in Washington, D.C., has now admitted that she personally scrutinized Tea Party applications for tax-exempt status as far back as 2010. We're told that Holly Paz has since been replaced as the top deputy in that division. We've had conflicting reports about whether she'd been placed on administrative leave or fired. To be honest, we just don't know which it is at this hour. But her disclosure to congressional investigators discredits claims repeatedly made by administration officials that higher-ups at the tax agency and those in Washington did not know about this practice, and that it was just two so-called rogue agents in the Cincinnati office who were acting on their own. Joining me now, radio talk show host Guy Benson, who is the political editor for townhall.com. So we knew about Holly Paz, we knew that she was somehow involved, and we knew that she had sat in on all the meetings that the Inspector General conducted, or virtually all, of the Cincinnati people, which the IG came under fire for, because the question was, how do you let the supervisor sit in as you're interviewing the underling and asking the underling, who told you to do this? I mean, it's not so good when it's like,
right.
that one, Okay, so now we find out, indeed, she was heavily involved personally, saying she scrutinized between 20 and 30 cases. And Guy, this was not a low-level Cincinnati employee.
No, of course not. It was a leader in Washington. So we have yet another layer of this onion coming off as we try to get to the rotten core of this IRS scandal. And as you say, Megyn, another talking point from the IRS has bitten the dust very hard in this case. Let's try to remember the timeline. At first, IRS leadership in Washington, they said, it's just maybe two people. It was rogue employees out in Cincinnati. As soon as we found out about this, we put an end to it, and so on and so forth. Well, that wasn't so much the case. There were documents that came out and testimony that was given that actually IRS leaders in Washington knew much sooner than they had admitted. Then you had the pushback from the Cincinnati employees saying, whoa, hang on a second. We were following directions from Washington, D.C. And in fact, some of the people who've spoken to Chairman Issa's committee, they've said, in fact, it was micromanaged, a lot of this targeting from D.C. And today we meet one of the micromanagers, Holly Paz. And some of her explanations and excuses as she tries to explain her own behavior really raise eyebrows, to say the least.
Well, I want to get into that with you in 1 second, but before we get to her explanation, I want to stick to the question of dishonesty, because one of the names in this whole IRS scandal that has really emerged front and center is Lois Lerner, and that's the woman who went before Congress and asserted her Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate herself rather than give congressional testimony. But before she did that, she said she's done nothing wrong, right? So she tried to exonerate herself. Well, Lois is the one who tried to break this scandal quietly, without a lot of fanfare, at this legal conference back on May 10th. After telling congressional investigators, it wasn't going on and refusing to do it in front of them, she tries to sneak it in a planted Q&A on May 10th. And she said that day, and I quote, "It's the line people that did it without talking to managers." Well, Holly Paz is a Washington-based IRS supervisor, a top deputy in the division, and that is directly contrary to what Lois Lerner said. And Lois Lerner, as far as we can see from the flowchart, Guy, is directly above Holly Paz. I mean, she knows what Holly Paz's role is, and so does it raise additional questions about Lois's honesty?
Well, Megyn, are you suggesting that Lois Lerner may have not told the whole truth about something? I mean, of course. She has been lying, and I use that word intentionally here, from the very beginning. In fact, the way that she leaked this information in a coordinated so-called Q&A session, she denied that had been arranged beforehand. That was a lie. It was. I mean, she has not been telling the truth. The only thing that she said before Congress when she was under oath was, I'm not going to say anything more, although I've done nothing wrong. Let's remember, Lois Lerner and some of her bosses, Stephen Miller, Douglas Schulman, they all knew about this and had opportunities before Congress under oath to share their knowledge of what was going on. There had been an internal IRS probe. There was the IG investigation going on. They knew about the targeting. They failed to mention it under oath to Congress. There has been systemic, endemic dishonesty at the highest levels of the IRS throughout this entire imbroglio. And that is one of the, they always say the cover-up's worse than the crime. In this case, that's debatable. They're both pretty bad, but the cover-up has been extensive and very ham-handed.
One wonders when Lois Lerner told the AP it's the line people that did it without talking to managers, whether she ever foresaw, being called to testify before Congress and the huge story this became. I want to ask you about Polly Paz, though, again, because she, in these interviews with Congress, said that, okay, the supervisors in D.C. did work closely with agents in the field, but they didn't fully understand what the agents were doing. And she said that in Cincinnati, agents openly talked about handling Tea Party cases, but she says, I thought the term was just shorthand for all applications from groups that were politically active, conservative and liberal. She thought that liberal groups were synonymous with Tea Party?
I mean, you have to just laugh. I mean, yes, when I refer to the Obama administration, it's just shorthand for talking about Republicans in Congress, too, right? I mean, no. When you talk about the Tea Party and conservatives, you're talking about the Tea Party and conservatives. And one of the few things that everyone agrees on in this scandal, right, left, and center, is that the crux of this was that only one side of the spectrum was targeted. I mean, that's like the basic fact of this whole thing. So the notion that they say, oh, they're just calling them Tea Party. And by the way, there's the BOLO lists, those be on the lookout rosters. Those were explicitly tailored to target and attack the right. So excuse number one, oh, we thought it was shorthand, does not, it strains credulity, to put it very, very mildly. And then second, Megyn, she also said, this was also a miscommunication. The people in Cincinnati had asked for guidance from Washington. The people in Washington were holding off on that and assumed the Cincinnati cases were continuing apace, even though they weren't, and therefore there was a delay of over a year on some of these decisions when it came down to who gets these tax-exempt statuses. And here we trod a familiar path to incompetence and ignorance, which seems to be the fallback position across this administration on any number of scandals, which I guess they assume sounds better than, open partisanship and deceit. They say, oh, whoops, we thought the other guys were doing it and we didn't really understand, and therefore all these applications were delayed. Come on, delay was the whole point here. They were trying to bury these folks in paperwork and keep them from getting an answer, and that is exactly what the MO was. So both of her excuses risable, in my view.
That is one of the many questions they still need to look into, the motivation. And, contrary to Elijah Cummings saying this case is closed, it's not closed. Guy, thank you.
Thank you, Megyn.